The following is a program of the Santa Barbara County Education Office. To learn more, visit sbceo.org.
I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, and I am thrilled to introduce my guest today, Kathleen Baushke, who's the Executive Director for Transition House in Santa Barbara. Kathleen, thank you so much for being here today and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today, Susan. I'm delighted to be here.
I can't wait for you to share about some of your story and the work that you're doing with Transition House. But first, I want to thank you so much for the tremendous impact that you make on our community. Obviously, you're the Executive Director for Transition House, but you also serve on a few boards for our community, and you also volunteer and support our youth. I know that you work with Partners in Education.
Yes, I do.
You're a longtime supporter of Partners, and you're a volunteer, and the boys at the Boys Camp. It is no wonder that the Santa Barbara Independent named you as a community hero, and so really honored that you're with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'd love to hear about the work and have you share about the work that you're doing, which is so important around homelessness and individuals who have found themselves in this situation. But first, let's start with you. Tell us about your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in California, but did not stay here long. I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Air Force, and so I moved all over the country and even lived in Europe for several years when I was young. And I think it was a wonderful upbringing. I got exposed to a lot of different types of people, different cultures, and I think that impacted the kind of person I am as an adult.
What are some of the countries that you lived in?
I lived in Germany for 4 years.
Okay,
yeah.
in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then where did you settle, kind of get brought up in terms of school, elementary, junior high, high school?
Again, all over.
Okay.
I went to school in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Alabama.
Wow.
That was interesting during the first year of desegregation. I also went to school in Virginia, my high school years, and subsequently college in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia as well.
And what were some of the interests that you had as a child? Just maybe extracurricular sports? What are some of the things that you were interested in?
I was interested in art and reading, two things that I'm still interested in today, and active in my church as a teen.
Oh, okay, great. So you talked about Virginia, I think is where you graduated from high school and attended college.
Right.
What was the major that you selected? What were you thinking you wanted to pursue?
My major was fine arts.
Fine arts,
Yes,
wonderful.
it was.
And what do you do with that major today?
Well, it's interesting the path that my career has taken me from arts into running a nonprofit. And the thing that I think I carry with me from school that helps me now is I learned how to make decisions. And I know that sounds strange, but in art making, that whole process is just about deciding what you're going to do next. You know, what mark are you going to make next? When have you done enough? When is something finished? And that process actually informs how I do my work now and process tasks and challenges and employee management and everything else. So.
Wow, Kathleen, thank you so much for sharing that metaphor. I had not thought about it that way before, but it makes perfect sense. I can see as an artist, you have to at some point say, this is great. I could do more, but I'm going to stop here. Or
sure.
I need to do more because it's not quite finished yet.
Right. I have my career, I made sort of a weird jump, and so I have to kind of think back myself and figure what enabled me to do what I do now. And I think the way that we think about college, it's not just the subject that you study or the skills that you gain, but it's how you go about that and how that informs your character and your wishes for the future.
That's wonderful. And while you were in college, would you say that's a time where you were thinking about serving community, or was that something that happened a long time before college?
I think some of that happened before college. College, especially if you're in an art school, informs, I think, the kind of person you're going to become, maybe politically, or your worldview. But it was after college that I was in an environment that created my interest in the subject of homelessness. And I moved to downtown Washington, D.C. in the mid-1980s for several years after school. And this was before I moved out to California, which has been a pretty permanent move. Mm-hmm. And during that time, homelessness was on the rise in not only Washington, D.C., but here in Santa Barbara, across the country, in the same way that it is now. Mm-hmm. So I became aware of it at that point and got involved in the issue there.
Mm-hmm. And is the issue of homelessness what led you to move to Santa Barbara County or California?
No, it was the decision to move here was really about having been in Northern Virginia and DC for a number of years. And again, I told you I grew up in a military family.
Yes.
I moved every year or two when I was growing up. And so it was just wanderlust, needed to do something different, try something different. But then, of course, once I got here, I settled down.
Got it. Well, you settled down in a really wonderful state and community for sure. How did you find yourself at the Transition House? What was the career path, or how did you find yourself there?
So I did, after I got out of school, I worked in graphic design, and I did a lot of work for nonprofits. After several years, I eventually had my own firm and did marketing materials, fundraising materials, both design and writing those materials for various nonprofits in town, and that's how I got involved with Transition House. And the first thing that I did for them as a volunteer was to produce a general brochure. They didn't have any marketing materials back at that time. It was in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And so in order to do that, I felt like I needed to actually become a volunteer and work in the shelter with the population that they served in order to be able to describe what they did. So I started volunteering, and I just kept volunteering and volunteered some more until the late 1990s. I was on the board of directors and was spending so much time there that and not so much time in my business that I kind of had to transitioned. Make a way to go about it. Yeah, so I got a lot of skills out of the volunteer side of it, having to do with the service provision that we provide, in my understanding. And then a lot of what an executive director does is fundraising and public relations and outreach, and that came from my background doing that for a living for 10 or 12 years before I joined Transition House.
I'd love to talk now about Transition House and some of the many, many programs that you provide. But I have a quick question around the art side and the nonprofit side. So are some of the materials that are used at Transition House today your own making?
Yes, I still do that, and it's a nice change from the other things that I have to do in my job. But I still do work on all of our messaging and.
I love that. Yeah, those who are watching today can go online and look at some of the materials that you provide, I'm sure, at your website. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the organization, and we'll talk about the need in Santa Barbara County as well. But let's start with the organization and some of the programs that you provide. We can talk about them all, but we'll want to start with a few.
So Transition House is an emergency shelter for homeless families with children. And along with shelter, we provide a full continuum of housing and anti-poverty services that are designed to lift people out of poverty and back into stable, permanent housing. That's the ultimate goal or the hope. Because we deal with families, we have a multitude of programs for children. At any given time, about 60% of our clients living in the shelter and in our affordable housing programs are under the age of 18. There's been a lot of research done on a national level, and of course through your work that kids that experience poverty have different barriers to success, especially if they've experienced homelessness. And statistics show that homeless children are 3 to 4 times more likely to become homeless than their house peers once they're adults. So we do whatever we can to intervene in that cycle while they are with us. So we have on-site free or subsidized infant care. We have programs in the evenings for all of the kids, depending on what their age are. Those programs are different, including tutoring, literacy programs, and other programs that help with self-esteem issues, behavioral issues, things like that.
Yeah, the statistics that you shared are really powerful. They're really important for us to know. And when you think about the children that are being served through Transition House, clearly there's a significant need of which you just spelled out. What would you say some of the kind of human needs are for the youth? When you look into their eyes, what is it that they're really needing, wanting, just on a day-to-day basis?
They need to know that everything's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine, their parents are in crisis. You know, if they've lost their housing, there's a high percentage of homeless people that have experienced trauma of one sort or another in the past. It might be domestic violence, or it could be experiencing violence in general in the neighborhood that they grew up in, or health traumas. And so the children are, they're living with a parent who may not be able to make them feel like everything's going to be okay, because the parent themselves doesn't necessarily believe that. Right. So they need an environment that's stable. They need an environment that is understanding and supportive. People often ask me what happens to kids when they come to Transition House. Do they switch schools? And no, they don't. In fact, we do everything that we can to keep them in the same school that they were attending before they come to us, because that could be the only stable thing in their life. Right. It's very important. And the school district does a fantastic job of working with our families and our agency to make sure that the family has transportation, bus tokens, things to get to school, their kids to school, and the supplies that the child needs. Yeah,
I think it's so powerful that you, as executive director of Transition House, recognize the differences, individualization of needs that individuals have when they come to you or find themselves needing your support. And children, you're identifying that need to have security, but also normalcy.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And some of the other programs that Transition House provides for adults, because I know that while students are in school, they're being taken care of in the before school, during school, after school. What are some of the programs and supports you provide for the adults?
So the adults all have weekly case management. They're assigned a case manager. We also have an employment specialist who works with them to help them either find work, although many of them already have work, they're just underemployed, or find better work, increase their income, and hopefully get on a career track or in an employment situation where they can get benefits, or eventually work towards a position where they can get benefits as well. So they get that support. If they're disabled, and a percentage of them are and can't work, then we help them secure entitlements like Social Security, disability income, or other things that they're going to need in order to stabilize and get back into housing.
Kathleen, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share other programs that you provide, but I also, if you'd like to, please feel free to share those next. But I also wanted to go back and talk about the needs that we have in the community. And the needs can be responded in so many different ways, but maybe we can start with numbers or percentages or increase of needs or decrease of needs in terms of individuals who are homeless over time. And you've been with Transition House for 19 years, so you've seen on staff, volunteering for longer
than that.
Since
1992.
Yes, so you've seen a trajectory. You can string for us, data in terms of what you've seen together for us. So I wanted to ask you about the need we have in Santa Barbara County or in Santa Barbara City.
So, as you know, we deal with homeless families, which is one segment of the homeless population in general. And homeless individuals they're different. We specialize in families because their needs are specific, and we want to not spread ourselves too thin and be able to focus on families. But in general, homelessness has been a problem in this city and across the nation that's only gotten worse as income disparity has increased, and the cost of housing has increased as compared to the wages. And of course, minimum wage has, for the last 30 years, gone up like this. The cost of housing has gone up like this. So the effect of that is that there's more people that are in extreme poverty, and the solutions are more difficult because the housing is so expensive. Even if we can get people work and get them some skills, it's still not enough. They can work 2 jobs and it's still not enough to be able to afford housing. So I'm not sure what your experiences are, but I think for most of us in this community, we're seeing a higher incidence of street population or street homelessness population. We see it more, it's becoming more apparent. That demographic is increasing, individuals, it's increasing with families too. They're not as visible. They might be in cars, they might be what we call couch surfing, staying with someone temporarily, but not in a situation where they have any housing protection.
Yeah.
So the problem has gotten worse as poverty has increased, I think, across the country. And so we're seeing that in Santa Barbara, but we're not unique.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And when you talked earlier about security, the need for security and normalcy, the description that you just provided sure is opposite of that.
Right.
Not having a place to call your own, not really knowing where you're going to sleep tomorrow. And that goes for adults as well as the children as well. And adults hoping to provide that for their children. So there's a lot of instability there.
Right. Exactly.
And I know that myself and others might have grown up with a picture in their mind of what homelessness means, or as you're describing Transition House and the families that you serve, they might have a picture in their mind about what a profile of a person might look like. And I think in some cases it's right, and in some cases it might be a misconception. So if you could be a myth buster right now and share with us some of the profiles of families you serve, that would be really helpful.
Sure. That's a great question. I love to be a myth buster. Over 95% of the families that we serve come from the greater Santa Barbara city area. It's not a transient population. It's our neighbors. It's people that have been here. And oftentimes they have limited skills, so their ability to earn an income is limited. They have had medical issues or some other life event that has created their situation. They may have past issues with substance abuse. They may have mental health disorders, but you don't see the same prevalence of those disorders in families as you do in single homeless individuals in the street population. So, we know that housed people have mental health disorders or substance abuse disorders, but the difference between them and these folks that have become homeless is they don't have a safety net. So I don't know about your family situation, but I would say for both of us, if we ever had a catastrophe where we couldn't work anymore, a medical issue, an accident, we would have family members that would take care of us if we couldn't take care of ourselves. So these people lack that support.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing a peek into some of the individuals and families that you serve, for sure. And I know that there have been tremendous successes at Transition House. You've seen them all. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those success stories or stories that really have lifted your spirits over time from the Transition House perspective.
The stories that really give me hope are stories of people that adults in these families' circumstances that grew up in very dysfunctional environments. They didn't have parents that were modeling successful behaviors for them. So there's one particular family that I think of, a mom and dad who both grew up in families where substance use was prevalent, and they were exposed to that and started using drugs when they were 12. And grew up that way. And there wasn't an expectation that they were going to go to college or that they were going to have a career. And somehow this couple met. Their problems became the couple's problems, and they lived that lifestyle for a number of years. But at some point, they decided that they were going to change. And they had kind of come in and out as a couple, and were living apart, but decided that they were going to make it work because they had a child. And they came into our program. They actually came through our program twice. The first time they were sober, they were working. The woman in this couple particularly was on a career track, and then she relapsed. So they fell out of housing, ended up coming back to our shelter, and now it's been, I think, 8 or 9 years since either of them had used. And they're also now spokespeople in the community for what they experienced. But they really made a deliberate choice for their child that they were going to grow up and stop doing this. And when you think of the fact that they never had a role model for what grow up means, right, that they did it on their own, it's pretty powerful.
That is powerful. Thank you for sharing that story.
Sure.
And I've heard you speak, Kathleen, several times, and every time you do, it's very, very powerful. And one thing I've heard you talk about is that the goal and mission is of course to support families who are homeless, but it's also to end the situation, or to work yourself out of a need. That's really the ultimate
right.
Ultimate goal.
Yeah,
so,
work my way out
right.
of a job, which I'm doing, but it's just getting worse. Unfortunately, I have job security.
Yeah, right, you do. But in terms of solving a problem, or helping to contribute to solve the issue, and obviously support it, but also solve, what are some ways in which community members who are viewing today, or those who we might speak to, can help both of these aspects for an organization like Transition House and the needs of our homeless population?
So you can approach that from a big picture standpoint, sure, or you can do something that's very specific and very local. And big picture standpoint, the things that are creating homelessness in our community and across the country are not something that our agency has any control over.
Right.
The wage disparity, the cost of housing, the amount of resources that the federal government puts towards public housing, all of these things you can have an impact on with your vote. So I think educating yourself and being aware of it, and then insisting that your elected officials do something to address the causes of homelessness, are all things that people can and should do.
Right.
Locally, obviously volunteering or financially supporting any agency that helps this population, especially I think agencies that try and change what people are experiencing, are great ways of trying to address it. And in the simplest form, I think just treating homeless people with respect. Mm-hmm. When we see people on the sidewalk, it's uncomfortable for us. It's uncomfortable for me. As well. I think all of us don't want to see someone suffering. We might be scared, but I think trying to realize that this person didn't start out this way. Yeah. You know, they were somebody's kid at one point, and we need to treat them with the respect that we ourselves want to be treated with, and that's a single step that people can take to think of them as other human beings.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Everything that you talked about just now is so action-oriented, mm-hmm, around educating oneself, around advocacy, around volunteering, and around treating people, mm-hmm, with compassion and respect, and to listen and to understand that they all came from a circumstance like ours. In other words, they're born into this, and they're humans and they're individuals. So really appreciate all of that. I would like to turn now to you as a leader, mm-hmm, and you're the executive director of an incredible organization. How do you hone your leadership skills? How do you continue to feed that part of your learning around leading?
Well, I still feel the core of success of the agency in my leadership is the same now as it was when I started, and that is to hire good people and then stay out of their way. Let them do what they do. And we have ours is a team approach. We have a huge number of community volunteers that help us with providing meal service in the shelter, with helping us with our children's programs, volunteering. And so it's a grassroots effort that we all can take ownership for. It's not my effort, it's all of ours. And so I think that that's the kind of leadership that this particular agency needs, is to preserve that history and to make sure that people feel that their contribution is valuable.
That's wonderful. And thank you for your leadership of the organization. It, as I said at the very beginning, such an impact that you make, but also your team makes for the community.
Thank you. We're all honored that we get to serve Santa Barbara. We really are.
Kathleen, as somebody who's giving, that's you, as a leader and volunteer and serving on boards and doing so much that you do, how do you find some semblance of balance or relaxation or refreshment?
As far as work-life balance goes, I have 3 wonderful dogs that I do activities with, and they're my family at this point in my life. I have 2 wonderful sons, but they're grown up and living their own lives now. So really doing stuff with my pets and just enjoying this beautiful part of the country that we live in. I'm a hiker and a boater, and enjoy being outdoors, and that gives me strength and solace to keep doing what I'm doing.
I'm glad. You had a big chuckle, crinkle in your eyes when you talked about work-life balance, but also as a dog lover myself, I appreciated your response for sure.
Yes.
So as we wind down with this program today, and time just flies by with you, Kathleen, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share a message with the community, anything you'd like around homelessness, around support for youth and families, something that you'd like for people to hear.
I think I would build upon the answer I just gave you to a question about how people can help. And that is, again, to recognize some of the prejudices we might have surrounding poverty, and to think about that, and to realize that people that are in this situation did not wake up one day and decide that they were going to be dependent on the rest of society. Or living on the street. They've really had a set of circumstances that have happened to them that are nothing like what has happened to me or you. Right. And I think, I believe that as society we have an obligation to help people, and our communities are a better place if we do. So if people would consider that, and then consider how they might be able to make an impact, and reach out to a social service agency like Transition House. We have a website, and www.transitionhouse.com, that has information about volunteer opportunities, and of course the ability to donate to the work that we do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today, and for sharing your story, both about yourself and the work and the important mission that you have.
Thank you for asking those questions. I was a little surprised by some of them. It was fun to think about, things I did when I was younger and how they inform me now. So thanks for the question.
Absolutely. And the impact that you make is lasting forever, I believe, and also appreciate your leadership in the way that you have such compassion for not only your team, but those you serve. And I really believe one big component of your leadership is around education. Yes. Education for the community. Yes. And education for those that you serve. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools. Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Schools of Thought.